The howl of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine once defined the sound of hope in a world collapsing into chaos. When a young British pilot strapped himself into the cockpit of a Spitfire in 1940, he believed he was climbing into the most advanced war machine ever created. The curved glass canopy, the polished brass dials, the humming vibration of the fuselage, everything felt like the frontier of human engineering. He pushed the throttle, the engine roared like a living creature, and the aircraft leapt forward, wheels lifting from the gross airstrip as England trembled beneath the threat of Nazi domination. This was the cutting edge. This was the future. And across the channel, the Messerschmitt Bf 109 answered the challenge with equal confidence. A German masterpiece built for speed, aggression, and dominance. Its Daimler-Benz engine snarled with raw power, propelling the sleek fighter through the sky. German pilots believed they were flying the sharpest blade in Hitler's arsenal, a weapon capable of carving victory from the clouds. But if either of those pilots, British or German, had looked 80 years into the future, if they could somehow witness what would rise from the technological evolution of aviation, their breath would stop, their hands would freeze on the controls, and they would understand instantly that everything they knew about air combat, everything they fought for, everything they trained for, would be rendered meaningless by a machine that defied the very concept of a dogfight. That machine is the F-35 Lightning II.2AWW to pilot. It would look less like an airplane and more like some dark, angular creature from another realm. No spinning propeller, no exposed engine rows, no familiar cockpit shape. It is smooth, stealthy, and silent in a way that would disturb anyone from the 1940s. But the shock goes far deeper than appearance. It is the philosophy behind it, the invisible power inside it, the cold intelligence guiding it. The Spitfire lived and died on the pilot's eyes. The Messerschmitt depended on instinct, reflex, and the ability of a human being to spot a distant speck in the sky before that speck spotted him. Dogfighting was an art of vision and guts. You turned into the enemy, rolled, climbed, dove, and fired your guns while hoping the other pilot blinked first. The difference between life and death was often a quarter second of reaction time. Now imagine that same Spitfire pilot scanning the sky on a bright summer morning. He looks left, right, above, and below. He squints into the sun. He searches the clouds for the outline of an enemy. And while he is doing this, while he believes he has situational awareness, an F-35 could already be tracking him from over 100 kilometers away. The modern jet would not see him with eyes. It would sense him with radar, infrared, electronic signature detection, and a network of battlefield data fed from satellites and other aircraft. It would know his speed, altitude, direction, and position long before the human inside the Spitfire even realized. There was another aircraft in the sky. The Spitfire could reach about 360 miles per hour, which in 1940 felt blisteringly fast. The Messerschmitt could dive past for 100 miles per hour, and pilots boasted of their aircraft's incredible acceleration. But the F-35 moves through the sky at well over 1,100 miles per hour, without even needing afterburners to overwhelm the performance of anything from WW2. Yet speed is barely the beginning of the difference. World War II pilots had to constantly scan the skies. The F-35 pilot sits inside a digital sphere of awareness. Instead of guessing, he receives a living, breathing 360-degree map of the entire battle space. He knows every aircraft, friendly or hostile, that exists around him, where they are, where they're going, what weapons they carry, and how much of a threat they pose. If that Spitfire pilot somehow spotted the F-35, if he looked up and saw a faint dark shape streaking across the sky, it would already be too late, because seeing the enemy first was everything in WW2. But in modern warfare, if you see your enemy, it means you are already dead. The F-35 could fire a missile from beyond the horizon, from so far away that the Spitfire pilot would not even hear the launch. The missile would streak toward him at several times the speed of sound. He would not see it. He would not hear it. He would not know it existed until fire and shrapnel tore through his aircraft and sent him spinning toward the earth. No maneuver, no roll, no sharp turn could save him. The simple, brutal truth is that a WW to fighter plane would not last 1 second in a real engagement against a modern 5th generation stealth jet. The gap between them is not 1 generation or 2. It is the difference between the telegraph and the smartphone, between a horse and a high-speed train. But the deepest shock would not be the weapons or the speed. It would be the invisibility. The F-35 is designed not to be seen, not by eyes, not by radar, not by heat sensors. A Spitfire pilot could fly directly toward an F-35 and still miss it, because the aircraft absorbs radar waves and hides its heat signature. To the men of 1940, radar itself was barely understood. A mysterious new technology mounted in giant stations along coastlines. But the F-35 stealth would make those radars blind. A Messerschmitt squadron could scramble, climb into the sky and fan out to search for the intruder. But they would find nothing. The F-35 could circle above them, behind them, or beneath them, unseen. The pilots would feel the same fear sailors felt when submarines first appeared in warfare. The fear of an enemy you cannot detect. And if Churchill, Hitler, Goering, or any WW to Commander Allied or Axis had seen this, if they had understood how future wars would be fought beyond visual range, beyond human reaction time, beyond traditional tactics, they would have realized something terrifying. The air forces of their era, legendary as they were, would be helpless against a single modern fighter jet. The Spitfire and the Messerschmitt were titans of their time, but against an F-35, they would be shadows from a vanished world. The sky of World War II was a place where human instinct ruled. Every turn, every dive, every split-second decision could mean the difference between life and death. A Spitfire pilot gripping the stick with sweat-soaked gloves understood one sacred rule. In a dogfight, the better pilot wins. Maneuverability was everything. The art of air combat was not written in textbooks. It was written in the reflexes of men who lived with death hovering inches behind them. When a Messerschmitt roared into battle with a British fighter, the two machines twisted through the air like furious predators. They turned inside each other's spirals, blacked out from G-forces, fought through the pain, regained consciousness and kept fighting. Aerial combat was intimate, personal, violent. You saw the face of the man trying to kill you. You saw the muzzle flashes from his guns. You smelled the smoke from your own engine. But that world, those rules disappear the moment the F-35 enters the sky. To compare the maneuverability of a Spitfire or ABF-109 with an F-35 is like comparing a ballet dancer with a lightning bolt. They move through the sky for entirely different purposes. In WW2, turning ability mattered more than anything. The aircraft with the tighter radius and faster roll rate often won. A Spitfire, with its elliptical wings, could carve through the air in a tight arc, giving it a critical edge over the Messerschmitt in turning battles. The German fighter, on the other hand, excelled in climbing and diving, using vertical maneuvers to force enemies into disadvantageous positions. These distinctions defined how pilots fought and often how they survived. But the F-35 does not measure superiority in turns or climbs. It measures superiority in awareness, in distance, in information. If by some twist of fate, a WW to dogfight happened directly under an F-35, the pilots below might still believe they were fighting on equal footing. They would not realize that the jet above them could see every angle of their battle in perfect clarity. The F-35's sensors can track targets in every direction, detecting heat signatures, radar reflections, and electronic emissions with surgical precision. It does not need to turn tightly because it does not need to get close. Its computer systems can calculate trajectories, anticipate maneuvers, and determine outcomes faster than a human can blink. Where the Spitfire pilot might rely on instinct, he's diving. I should climb, or he's turning left. Cut inside, the F-35 relies on cold mathematics. It does not hope to outmaneuver. It does not react emotionally. It acts with absolute certainty. Still, imagine for a moment the impossible, that somehow a Spitfire or Messerschmitt manages to get close enough to challenge the F-35 in a traditional dogfight. Even here, the difference would be devastating. The modern jet, with its thrust vectoring and computerized control surfaces, can perform maneuvers that would tear the wings off any WW-2 fighter. It can turn sharply at high speed without losing stability. It can climb vertically with explosive force. It can roll, pitch, and accelerate in combinations that would make a 1940s pilot think the aircraft was breaking the laws of physics. And while the WW-2 pilot fights with both hands, both feet, and every muscle in his body, the F-35 pilot makes subtle, minimal movements. The aircraft's computers correct everything automatically, allowing the pilot to focus on the mission rather than the mechanics of flight. But maneuverability is only a fraction of the story. A dogfight is worthless without weapons, and here the gulf becomes almost cruel. In the Spitfire, the pilot fires machine guns or cannons that require him to get very close, often within just a few hundred meters. He must hold his aim steady while the enemy twists and jerks through the sky. A burst too short and he misses. A burst too long and his guns jam, even when hitting the target. A skilled pilot sometimes needs several seconds of continuous fire to bring down an enemy. Against bombers, those seconds could stretch into long, desperate chases. Now picture that same Spitfire pilot facing an enemy he cannot see, a missile, launched from an aircraft miles away. A missile that moves faster than any propeller plane ever built. A missile that does not miss. The AIM-120 carried by the F-35 is a weapon that makes dogfighting obsolete. Fired from over 100 kilometers away, it tracks its target with relentless precision. No dive can outrun it. No turn can shake it. No flare can deceive it. It hunts heat, motion, radar reflections, whatever signature the target gives off, and destroys it with ruthless efficiency. A Messerschmitt pilot used to bank sharply to escape gunfire. Against a modern missile, that maneuver is useless. The missile will simply adjust its path. It does not tire. It does not overheat. It does not lose focus. And once it locks on, survival becomes nearly impossible. WW-2 aircraft carried a small number of bullets and ammunition. The F-35 carries weapons that change the meaning of combat entirely. It can fire missiles beyond the range of sight. It can hit multiple targets in different directions. It can launch a missile and then retreat without ever being detected. It does not reveal itself until it has already secured the kill. Even its gun, normally the last resort, fires with terrifying accuracy, stabilized by computer systems and guided by a helmet display that tracks the pilot's vision. The F-35's cannon would shred a WW-2 aircraft with a tiny burst. A Spitfire might withstand small caliber rounds, but modern 25mm depleted uranium shells would tear through its frame like paper. The brutal honesty is this in the face of modern weapons. The maneuverability of WW-2 fighters does not matter. Their bravery does not matter. Their angles, their tactics, their instincts, their formation flying it all collapses in the shadow of a single fact. An F-35 can kill them long before they ever know it is there. That is not disrespect to the pilots of the past. In fact, their courage becomes even more impressive when compared to the cold automation of modern warfare. They fought with nothing but their senses and their courage. The F-35 fights with an entire universe of technology at its command. If a WW-2 ace with 30 or 40 victories stepped into the sky today, he would be astonished not by how different air combat is, but by how little of it remains. Dogfights, once the romantic heart of aerial warfare, are now almost non-existent. The battle happens long before planes get close. The outcome is decided by who sees first, who fires first, who vanishes first. And in every category, the F-35 stands in a dimension far beyond anything imagined in the 1940s. Asterisk. The comparison between World War II fighters and the modern F-35 Lightning becomes even more unreal when you stop, looking at just speed and agility, and begin to examine the deeper layers of aviation warfare: detection, survivability, engagement ranges, and pilot workload. These are the areas where the gap transforms from large to absolutely impossible to bridge. For a pilot flying in 1940, combat was a human duel of eyes, instincts, and reflexes. But for a pilot flying the F-35, combat is a battle of information, computers, stealth geometry, electronic warfare, and invisible beams of radar energy. And this is where the true shock emerges. A Spitfire or Messerschmitt wouldn't just lose, they would die. Without ever understanding what killed them, a fighter pilot in WWI scanned the sky visually, twisting his neck, craning his body, constantly looking for the tiny black dots that might be an enemy formation coming to attack. A Spitfire pilot typically saw the enemy at distances between 1 and 5 miles depending on cloud, sunlight, and luck. The Messerschmitt pilot was in the same situation. Both aircraft were entirely dependent on the naked eye and maybe a few radio calls. If a target was above the cloud layer or if the sun was behind it, the pilot was effectively blind. Even at maximum performance, a WWI fighter could only detect what it could physically see, nothing more. Now imagine the F-35. Long before a human eye could ever pick up a dot in the sky, the F-35 systems are already tracking, analyzing, labeling, and mapping enemy aircraft. The pilot does not need to spot anything because the jet does it for him. It builds a 360-degree digital picture of the battlefield using multiple radars, infrared search sensors, and electronic sniffers. The aircraft is fusing data not just from its own systems, but also from satellites, AWACS planes, ground stations, and other stealth fighters. The F-35 is essentially fighting with the sight of an entire military network behind it. For a Spitfire or Bf-109, this level of awareness is not just futuristic, it is magic. But the difference grows even larger when you look at radar. A WWI aircraft had no onboard radar at all. Pilots had no means to detect a target beyond visual range. Meanwhile, the F-35's AESA radar can spot targets more than 150 to 200 miles away, track dozens of them simultaneously, prioritize threats automatically, and predict their movements. To the WWI aircraft, the F-35 is a ghost present, hunting, watching but completely invisible until it decides to appear. And by that point, it is already too late. Stealth adds another layer to this imbalance. A Spitfire's radar signature, if measured by modern standards, would be enormous, like a flying barn door. A Messerschmitt would not be much different. These aircraft were built for speed, not invisibility. Their engines, propellers, wings, metal frames, and guns would light up radar screens like fireworks. On the other hand, the F-35 is shaped like a shadow. Its edges, surfaces, and angles are designed to scatter radar waves, absorbing some and deflecting others. Even its exhaust is engineered to reduce heat signature. To a modern radar, an F-35 looks like a bird. To a WWI radar, if one even existed with enough power, it might not appear at all. You can't fight what you can't detect. And WWI fighters, tragically for them, would detect nothing. Weaponry is another realm where the comparison becomes surreal. A Spitfire's main weapons were typically 8.303 Browning machine guns firing small bullets at close range. Later versions had cannons, but even then, a Spitfire had to fly close within 300 meters, sometimes less, to hit its target effectively. A dogfight was a knife fight in the sky. The Bf-109 had cannons too, but their range and accuracy still required close engagement. A WWI pilot had to physically get behind his enemy, line up the shot, manage throttle, rudder, and roll, all while being shot at. Now contrast that with the F-35. The jet carries AIM-1 to OAMROM missiles, capable of destroying targets more than 100 miles away. The missile has its own radar, its own guidance computer, and flies faster than the speed of sound. The F-35 simply points, locks, and fires. The enemy will never see the missile, never hear it, never know it was launched. Even in a close-range scenario, the F-35 carries AIM-9X missiles that can lock onto a target that is not even directly in front of the aircraft. The pilot can look at the target, and the helmet sensors tell the missile where to go. To a Spitfire pilot, this would feel like sorcery. A weapon that kills by following your eyes. Completely unimaginable. Now consider survivability. A WWII fighter was fragile canvas, aluminum, rivets, and fuel tanks waiting to ignite. One burst of cannon fire could rip off a wing or set the plane ablaze. The engines had no protection. The pilots sat in a thin cocoon of metal. But the F-35 is armored, redundant, compartmentalized, and supported by electronic countermeasures that can jam enemy radar, confuse missiles, or disable tracking systems. Modern missiles rarely hit directly. They detonate near the target. But the F-35's stealth, agility, and electronic warfare systems make even reaching detonation range a challenge. Against WWII aircraft, the F-35 would not just survive, it would dominate without ever being touched. Pilot workload in WWII was overwhelming. Managing throttle, propeller pitch, radiator controls, mixture, trim, and navigation all while fighting was a constant struggle. But the F-35 reduces pilot workload through automation. The aircraft manages many systems itself. The pilot's job is to make decisions, not fight the jet. The cockpit's advanced displays and helmet systems provide information in a natural, intuitive format. In a Spitfire, the pilot fights the aircraft. In an F-35, the aircraft fights for the pilot. If a Spitfire or Bf-109 entered battle thinking in WWII terms, circle, climb, dive, line up a shot, they would find themselves destroyed by a weapon fired long before they even knew an enemy existed. They would be outranged, outseen, out-accelerated, out-climbed, outmaneuvered electronically, and outthought by the aircraft's computer systems. It would not be a contest, it would be a one-sided slaughter, and yet, for all the unimaginable differences between them, the heart of aerial combat remains the same. A human in a cockpit making life or death choices. The machines changed. The skies changed. The speed, the weapons, the technology all transformed. But the courage required to climb into a fighter jet, whether it is a Spitfire in 1940 or an F-35 in 2025, remains timeless. The final layer of the comparison between WWII fighters and the F-35 Lightning II is not found in their engines, weapons, or radar signatures. It is found in the nature of war itself, in how technology reshaped the very meaning of a dogfight. The Spitfire and Messerschmitt belonged to an age where victory was carved by the sharp edges of maneuvering skill, by the split-second decisions of men fighting within sight of each other, hearing the rattle of machine guns and the scream of engines. The F-35 belongs to a world where battles are decided before the enemy is even aware that a fight has begun. And if you place these aircraft in the same sky, the shift would be so staggering, so extreme, that even the bravest WWIIs would feel as if the laws of war had been rewritten. A pilot like Adolf Galland or Douglas Bader measured the battlefield in turns, altitude, and angles. They lived inside the envelope of their aircraft's aerodynamics, mastering energy management, climbing at just the right moment, diving at the perfect angle, timing a burst of fire within a tiny kill window. Every dogfight was a dance of life and death. They had to know exactly how their aircraft stalled, how it rolled, how it bled speed, how it behaved in a hard climb. Victory required not just skill, but an intimate relationship with the aircraft, a partnership forged through hours of flying and combat. The aircraft responded faithfully, but brutally, rewarding precision and punishing any mistake. An F-35 pilot, by contrast, lives inside an entirely different world. He is not fighting for angles, he is fighting for information superiority. He is not scanning for visual silhouettes, he is scanning for digital signatures. The battle is not a duel of turns, but a chess game played miles apart, with sensors extending vision far beyond human limits. If WWII pilots fought with muscle memory and instinct, the F-35 pilot fights with data fusion and network-linked awareness. It is still flying, still combat, still dangerous, but the rhythm, the tempo, the mental model is transformed into something a WWII could never predict. Imagine a WWII transported through time, suddenly placed in the cockpit of an F-35. He would see the sky, but also the invisible world beneath it, colored symbols marking threats, allies, unknowns. circles showing missile ranges, lines showing radar locks. His first reaction might be disbelief because the aircraft is not asking him to chase a target. It is telling him where everything is, what everything is doing, and what everything means. The pilot in 1940 would have to build this awareness through sweat, fear, and instinct. The pilot in an F-35 receives it ready-made, fused, filtered, prioritized. The aircraft has become an extension of the pilot's mind. And then comes the greatest difference of all engagement range. We fighters fought at hundreds of meters. Even long-range cannon shots rarely exceeded 1 kilometer. Pilots saw their enemy clearly before firing. They watched bullets impact metal. They saw their opponent fall. There was a brutal intimacy to the violence. A Spitfire pilot firing at a Messerschmitt could see the cockpit shatter, the smoke pour out. The pilots struggle. Victory was undeniable, but also personal. The cost of war was not hidden, but the F-35 eliminates this entire emotional environment. Engagements happen from dozens of miles away. A pilot fires a missile at a dot on a screen, a radar return, a digital track. There is no face, no silhouette, no wing shape. There is no scream of machine guns, no fragments flying. There is only a confirmation message on the display. Modern combat removes the visual connection that defined WWII dogfights. It is clean, clinical, almost silent. The enemy never knows who fired, from where, or how. The F-35 pilot does not chase, he deletes. This difference changes not just tactics but psychology. WWII pilots often described dogfights as chaotic, terrifying, and yet strangely intimate. They were fighting men they could see. In the F-35's world, the enemy is an invisible symbol that disappears before the pilot ever sees a physical aircraft. This detachment changes the entire emotional framework of air combat. Now imagine putting these eras together, forcing them into one battlefield. The Spitfire or Bf-109 pilot would try to gain altitude, position himself for a turning fight, search the sky for a shape or a glint of sunlight. He would believe, with every bit of training he had, that altitude and angles bring victory. But altitude and angles mean nothing against a radar-guided missile, traveling many times the speed of sound. A WWII pilot might never even hear the missile, let alone see the F-35. He would simply vanish from the sky, hit by an invisible hand from beyond the horizon. Even if by some miracle the WWII aircraft survived long enough to approach visual range, the fight would still be hopeless. The F-35's helmet would highlight the target automatically. The missile would lock on even if the aircraft was not pointing directly at the target. The F-35 could turn inside its own limitations using thrust, fly-by-wire stability, and computerized controls to perform maneuvers impossible for WWII aircraft. And if all else failed, the modern jet's sheer power would allow it to leave the WWII fighter behind in seconds. But the story is not only about superiority, it is also about evolution. The Spitfire and Messerschmitt represent the birth of the modern fighter machines, built by nations desperate to survive. Their pilots shaped the rules of aerial combat. They showed courage and improvisation in skies filled with uncertainty. Without their sacrifices, there would be no F-35, no stealth fighters, no digital warfare. The F-35 is the great-grandchild of the machines that defended Britain or crossed the Channel, or fought over the deserts and islands of a world at war. Every rivet in the Spitfire, every bolt in the Bf-109, every lesson learned in their brutal aerial duels contributed to the evolution of technology that led to the F-35. The gap between them is not a sign of disrespect, it is the result of decades of innovation built upon the foundation those early pilots created with their courage. Their struggles were the seeds of a future they could never imagine. And perhaps that is the most powerful truth of all. The F-35 is not a rival to the Spitfire. It is the outcome of everything the Spitfire stood for. It is not the destruction of WWII aerial warfare, it is its legacy. If the pilots of 1940 could see the F-35 streak across the sky, silent and invisible to radar, powered by a computer brain and armed with weapons that seek targets across miles, they would not feel threatened. They would feel awe. They would understand that the skies they fought to defend eventually reached this level of mastery. If you placed a Spitfire, ABF 109, and an F-35 in the same sky, only one would return. But in a deeper sense, all three would be flying together, because the courage, sacrifice, and innovation of the past are the wings that carry the future.